Chapter 17 Peewee. Some days later, the members of the Woodlawn family were finishing breakfast. Caddie, Tom, and Warren at one side of the table were buzzing and tittering over some project for the day. Now that school was over, their days were full of delight. Today they were talking of going to Chimney Bluffs. Father folded his napkin and pushed back his chair. "All play and no work," said Father, purposefully misquoting the old adage, "makes Tom, Caddie, and Warren lazy children. Isn't that so?" He looked down at the table at them and smiled. "Oh, no, Father," said Caddie. "We've been very industrious." "The results of their industry," said Mrs. Woodlawn dryly, "being dirty faces, holes in their stockings, and three-cornered rents in trousers and petticoats." "Well," said Father, "suppose I put them to work. I am going to give you three children the far field to plow, the one next to the woods. You may hitch Betsy to the plow and take turns at that if you wish. Take as long as you like, but I'll expect your task well done." "All by ourselves? Without Robert? That'd be bully. We can go to Chimney Bluff some other day," cried the three adventurers, and away they dashed for Betsy and the plow. Indian John's dog barked and ran with them. It was almost as good as having Nero. The first few furrows were great fun. Sometimes in the past they had turned up Indian arrowheads in plowing the far field, but nothing so fortunate happened today, and plowing gets very monotonous after a while. It was a sparkling spring day with a blue sky and a warm sun. The silver birches in the wood had begun to glow with a faint aura of budding green, and the willows at the edge of the river were turning yellow. Overhead flew a phoebe bird, crying, "Peewee, peewee." "Let's take turns with the plow," said Tom. "All three of us don't have to go around every time. Takes only one to guide the plow. Let one guide the plow twice around the field while the other two sit in the fence corner and tell stories." "Hurrah!" yelled Warren. "I speak to be the first to sit in the fence corner." "All right," said Tom. "I'll take Betsy around first while you and Caddie sit. I'll be thinking up a story." "You spoke to be first to sit," said Caddie to Warren. "I speak to be the one to sit when Tom tells a story." "Oh, that's no fair. Tom's got to tell it to me, too." "All right," said Tom. "I'll tell it twice. But first I've got to make it up." He flapped the reins over Betsy's back, caught the handles of the plow, and started his first furrow. Caddie and Warren settled down in a sunny corner of the zigzag rail fence to think up stories. They usually retold Robert Ireton's lusty Irish tales or some old favorites from the tattered volume of Andersen's fairy tales. Sometimes they even told the stories which Mother read them from the young lady's friend or the mother's assistant when they weren't too dull or moral. But Tom made his stories up. That's why Tom's stories were always in demand. Tom's stories had the virtue of novelty, and they were full of wild and bloody action. That they, too, were a sort of compound of Ireton and Andersen did not occur to the children, who knew few stories, except those in the Bible and the school reader. "Have you thought it up yet?" cried Warren and Caddie, as Tom came around at the end of his first furrow. "Peewee, peewee," called the phoebe bird overhead. Betsy would have stopped, but Tom slapped the reins over her back and swung into his second furrow. "Yep," he called back, "I'm getting it." Reluctantly, Warren took the plow when Tom came back from the second round. Caddie and John's dog cuddled close to Tom as he sat down. The spring air was a little keen for sitting long in comfort. "Well, begin," said Caddie. Tom's eyes were bright with satisfaction over his story. "Well," he said, "once upon a time there was an old farmer named Peewee." "What a funny name for a farmer!" exclaimed Caddie. "Never you mind that," said Tom, a trifle impatient at being interrupted. "You'll know why his name had to be Peewee in a minute, if you'll listen." "Go on, then." "Well, once there was an old farmer named Peewee, and he had a farm beside a lake. And one day he was out plowing up his field when a little bird flew overhead, calling, 'Peewee, Peewee.' Now old man Peewee had a pretty bad temper, and he thought the little bird was just making fun of him. So what did he do but pick up a rock he had just plowed out and heave it at the bird. 'I'll teach you to make fun of old man Peewee,' says he. The bird just flapped its wings and flew on, but the rock fell back and hit one of Peewee's oxen on the head, and it fell over dead. Well, old man Peewee was mighty mad, but he wouldn't never let anything get him down. So he stopped plowing and skinned his ox and took the hide to town to see what he could get for it. Well, just as he was driving into town, he saw a second-hand store with a lot of old furniture sitting out front, and there were some young people running about and playing I Spy. Just as Peewee drove up, he saw a very rich young man run and hide himself in a big empty churn and pull the cover shut after him. So Peewee got down off his wagon and took the ox hide into the storekeeper. "What'll you give me for this hide?" says he to the storekeeper. "Why, nothing," says the storekeeper. "I haven't got money to spend on old ox hides." "I'll tell you what," says Peewee. "Trade me that worthless old tern for my hide, and you'll be getting the best of the bargain." "All right," says the storekeeper, "if you'll carry it off." So Peewee left his hide and loaded the tern up onto his wagon. Now, when Peewee had got the tern a little ways out into the country, the rich young man began to pound on the side of it and yell, "Let me out! Let me out!" "How so?" says Peewee. "I bought this tern and everything in it. You belong to me." "I'm rich," says the young man. "I'll pay you anything. Only let me out." So Peewee let the young man out, and the young man gave him a purse full of gold. When Peewee got home, he showed all his neighbors the purse full of gold, which he had got in exchange for the ox hide. As soon as they saw it, the neighbors all ran to kill their best oxen and take the hides to town. When they found they could get nothing for them, they were so mad at Peewee they swore they'd never speak to him again. "Is that all?" asked Caddie eagerly, as Tom paused for breath. "Oh, no," said Tom. "The best part's coming." Warren, going by on his first furrow, looked at them wistfully, but Tom motioned him on. "Well, sometime after that," continued Tom, "Peewee and his old wife were out hoeing potatoes, when that same bird flew over the potato patch and sang, 'Peewee, Peewee.' 'You'll try that again, will you?' yells Peewee, flying into a passion. 'I'll teach you.' And he threw his hoe at the bird. But the bird flew away, and the hoe came down and hit Peewee's wife over the head and killed her." "Oh dear," said Caddie. Did you really mean it to kill her, Tom?" "That's all right," said Tom. "It's just a story." So then, when Peewee saw that his wife was dead, of course he felt very sorry, but he wouldn't ever let anything get him down. So he tied her sunbonnet on her to shade her face, and set her up on a seat, with her back to the lake, facing the highway which ran along by the lake at that place. Then he set a basket of oranges on one side of her, and a basket of lemons on the other, and then he went and hid himself in the bushes near by. Pretty soon along came a man driving a coach and 4 black horses. When the man saw Peewee's wife sitting in the road, he stopped his horses and got down off the coach. "Say, old lady, how do you sell your oranges?" he asked. Peewee's wife didn't answer. "How do you sell your lemons?" No answer. The man thought she was deaf and began to shout as loud as he could. "Say, old lady, how do you sell your oranges? How do you sell your lemons?" Still no answer, and he was mad. Before he knew what he was doing, he reached out and gave her a punch, and the poor old woman fell over backward into the lake. Now Peewee came out of the bushes, and he says he, "You've drowned my poor old wife, you rascal. I'll have the law on you." "Oh, please, sir," says the driver of the coach, "don't do that. I didn't mean to drown her at all, at all. Here, I'll give you my coach and 4 black horses if you'll say nothing more about it." "Very well," says Peewee, "but see you don't go around pushing any more old women into lakes." Well, Peewee's neighbors had said that they'd never speak to him again, but when they saw him driving a fine coach and 4 prancing black horses, they couldn't help coming to ask him about them. Peewee told them he'd accidentally killed his wife, and how he'd set her up by the roadside, and the coachman had given him the coach and 4 in exchange for her. So all the farmers knocked their old wives on the head and set them up by the road to wait for a coach. "Good land, Tom!" cried Caddie. "They'd never do that." "Say, who's telling the story anyway?" demanded Tom irritably. "Well, go on." "Of course the coach didn't come along," continued Tom. "And the other farmers were good and mad, as you may well believe." "I should think so," said Caddie. They began to plot how they could get rid of Peewee. So they came to his farm one day and got him and put him on a big hogshead barrel. They headed it up with Peewee inside, and they trundled it down to the lake where they meant to drown him. Now, on the edge of the lake, there was a tavern like the one to Dunville, and before they drowned Peewee, the farmers decided they'd go in and get a drink to celebrate getting rid of him. So in they went, leaving Peewee in the hogshead on the edge of the lake. "Let me out! Let me out!" shouts Peewee, pounding his fists in the sides of the hogshead. Now just at this time comes an old shepherd driving his flock of sheep. He was old, and he had come a long way, and he was mighty tired of life. So he asked Peewee what was the matter, and when Peewee told him, he says, "I'll change places with you, Peewee. I am old, and I'm mighty tired of life." So he took the head off the barrel and let Peewee out, and he got in himself. Well, Peewee headed up the hogshead and went off, driving all the sheep before him to his own farm. Pretty soon out came the other farmers, feeling pretty gay. "Goodbye, Peewee," says they. "Good riddance to bad rubbish." And they up and pushed the hogshead into the lake. On their way home they stopped by Peewee's farm to divide up his things among themselves, and there was old Peewee himself with a fine new flock of sheep. "How come you're here, and where'd you get those sheep?" asked the farmers. "We thought you were at the bottom of the lake." "So I was," said Peewee. "You put me there yourselves, didn't you? But 'tis a grand place at the bottom of the lake, and full of sheep. I took only the smallest part for myself. There's flocks and flocks for the rest of you." "Do tell," says the rest of the farmers, and they were all so greedy that they ran and jumped into the lake to get flocks of sheep. Of course they never came back again, and Peewee was lord and master of all their lands and cattle, and that's the end. Caddie heaved a deep sigh. "That's a good story, Tom," she said admiringly. "Only I hope he didn't live happily ever afterward." "Well, sometimes he used to have nightmares," conceded Tom. "My turn now," said Warren, coming up for the second round. Caddie set her hands to the handle of the plow and chirped to Betsy. As she went away down the field, she heard Tom beginning, "Once upon a time there was an old farmer named Peewee." How many times she was to hear it again, for that became the Woodlawn's favorite story. Many years later, Caddie herself, laughing and protesting, had to tell it over and over to begging children and grandchildren.